Toto vydanie pod lampou na Majdane budeme venovať.
This episode of the Pod Lampo Maidan discussion is focused on media and freedom of speech. And we have a good reason for that. Free media is under incredible pressure around the world. It is not only the case of Central Europe or Russia, but also the United States, for example. What does it mean for us? And how can we protect ourselves? We will discuss this with people who work for media. The first question: each regime that is not democratic and wants to survive starts by attacking the media. In Central Europe, we can see this a lot recently. We can observe many ways being used to take control over all mass media, not just privately owned media companies, but also public service broadcasters. The first question is for Adam Michnik, the founder of the legendary Gazeta Wyborcza newspaper. What kind of tactics does the Polish government use to control the media?
To prawda, że media są tym bardzo czułym sygnalizatorem.
It's true that mass media signalize what's going on with democracy. It was quite obvious first in Belarus, then in Russia, Hungary, and now in Poland. But I don't think these are the only examples. If we look at Italy, where Berlusconi took media under his control, or if we listen to what President Trump says about journalists and mass media, we notice a universal and very alarming tendency. How can we fight it? We have to understand what the government wants. They don't want independent mass media. The government wants mass media that would serve as a transmission of power to the masses, as Lenin once said. In this view, media should be a propaganda tool, and a tool to destroy any public debate and critical thinking to pave the way to dictatorship. We are dealing with the tabloidization of the media, their primitivization and economic ruin. It doesn't have to result from a police action. It's enough if the capital takes media under control and destroys their independence. We can see the government constantly attacking public media, which have eventually become a sort of a ministry of the governmental propaganda. Secondly, we are dealing with the economic pressure when all institutions related to the state treasury are not allowed to advertise in mass media. It's forbidden. Businesses with the state capital are not allowed to place advertisements in newspapers such as Gazeta Wyborcza, where I work. Next, they carry out systematic inspections that don't let us work because we have to put ourselves right with inspectors. Thirdly, in the situation when Prosecutor General and courts are under control of the ruling party, they launch dozens of proceedings against us for writing something bad about the government. They are systematically harassing us. Organising campaigns against us, saying that we are a tool of international powers, in the same way as in Budapest they regarded Soros to be their main enemy. Some sort of a monster. How to defend oneself? You have to understand the nature of that power. You can't count on persuading them. You can't persuade that power. You have to defend yourself with constitutional measures first. And then you have to be confident not to give up. At a certain point, a Ukrainian solution could take place in Poland. I don't rule out a Maidan. I don't rule it out. To clarify this, during Mečier's era in the 1990s, he took control over public service media, and the private ones could not publish advertising by state-owned companies. This was widely known. In Poland, the ban is an official one. There is no such law. There is a practice. For instance, at the petrol stations of the governmental enterprise Orlen, they have an instruction to hide Gazeta Wyborcza. When somebody enters, it's not there. But if you ask, give me Gazeta Wyborcza, they will get it. There are many examples like this. It's one of the elements of war on media, and furthermore, it's war on democracy. It's about blocking a voice of an independent public opinion. Recently, we published an article by Slovak intellectual Martin Šimečka about how the Slovaks got rid of Mečiar. I was publishing it thinking that we, Poles, should do what Slovaks did when they dismissed Mečiar. It is possible to dismiss PIS just in the same way. It is possible. We are not defenseless. We should also keep in mind Havel's advice about power of powerless. We have possibilities to defend ourselves against the power, to resist. But we need A, imagination, B, courage, and C, determination. Then we'll win. And there is something else quite important. Our response shouldn't be isolated. We shouldn't speak the Donald Trump's language, America first. We shouldn't say Poland first. It's a common interest. A collapse of democracy in Ukraine, Budapest, or Warsaw would be dangerous for the whole of Europe. And that's why defending democracy in Ukraine, Hungary, or Poland is in the best interest of the whole of Europe. Adam Michnik described the way the Polish government attacks and tries to neutralize the Polish media. What methods does the government in Hungary use? I come from a country where in the course of 1 year, the 2 largest daily newspapers were closed down. seemingly for economic reasons. But we know that it was a politically motivated decision. Shortly afterwards, the largest conservative weekly also got closed down. I and my colleagues, as employees of one of these dailies, we very rapidly established a weekly newspaper, which has become the second or third largest in the country over 6 months. It was one of the best and also most difficult periods of my life. We had to go and sell the paper on the street because we had no cash whatsoever. We launched and built this newspaper from scratch. Our advertising plan was zero, and we can adhere to that. We will have no advertising. Not only do we forego state and government ads, but also private companies refuse to advertise with us because they are afraid that the government will unleash auditing agencies on them if they do. There's another level. People don't dare to subscribe to us because they are afraid that the post office, also a state-owned company, will make the list of subscribers public. At the same time, this is a very blissful situation for me as a journalist. We live in very interesting times, similar to the 1980s. We are much more creative and devoted. We were able to depose an ambassador this week, even though the government refuses to answer our questions. And we are banned from government press conferences. They don't let us enter official events. And if we ask the government something, they will respond to another newspaper, handing them the story. In spite of all of this, we were able to get an ambassador out of office. So I think that matters are taking a terrible course. But as a journalist, I find this period very interesting. And if we take stock, I can say that professionally, this period is much more interesting than 1 or 5 years ago. True, we were unable to pay salaries to our colleagues for 2 months, but they are devoted and work out of commitment. Now we can pay them at least the minimum wage, because readers want what we do. We all know the story of Hungary's biggest leftist or socialist newspaper, Népszabadság, but you are from a daily that is rather conservative, and still you are under pressure of the government, which tried to close you down. Yes, in the life of the daily Magyar Nemzet, there were periods when we were very close to Fidesz and the government. They sent people down to the editorial office to show us the way, so to say. Then our owner had an altercation with the Prime Minister, so our last 3 years were the freest period in my career as a journalist. I'm still saying I'm a right-wing conservative journalist, but unfortunately the Hungarian government and Fidesz have distanced from these conservative values, and now they are operating as a kind of a mafia state built on stealing EU resources. And they are trying to build the world in which everyone is just a trooper executing orders without thinking. There is a media owner currently in Hungary, Orbán's neighbour, who was just a gas fitter in 2010. He didn't have any significant work. He owned 2 small companies, but no media, and now he owns more than 200 publications and several companies, perhaps even 300 at this point, but 200 can be proven. So this was about private media. What about public service media in Hungary? That practically doesn't exist, or it exists in purely propaganda form. For instance, I was formerly a regular invitee of their TV programs, and now there's a blacklist. People who dropped out of this regime don't exist anymore. They have no chance to present their views because they are not allowed to appear on TV. Meanwhile, year by year, they spend more money on public media. They have learned a lot, so now, in the breaks between sports programs with high viewer rates, they insert hardcore, rapid, one-minute news flashes, which are pure propaganda with buzzwords. And it's very effective, even if people don't watch state channels so much, because when the Hungarian national football team is playing, they watch the game, and if they don't switch away soon enough, they'll get the 1 minute of propaganda the government wants them to see. So we've heard about the Polish and Hungarian situation. Tomáš, you come from the Czech Republic, and you know a lot about Czech media. Are there any similarities in the Czech Republic in terms of taking control over the media landscape? It is slightly different. When I look at the situation in Poland and Hungary, in the Czech Republic, it is not that bad. But that does not mean we have no reasons to worry. The political pressure is slightly different in the Czech Republic. It is more subtle and perhaps more sophisticated. We will see if it can go as far as in Poland or Hungary. Czech politicians don't really say openly that they are against liberal democracy like Orbán does. There were some who did, like the former president Václav Klaus, but he is not politically relevant anymore. The Prime Minister Babiš doesn't say anything like that. In fact, he claims to be pro-European and pro-democratic. He likes to be seen in presence of Angela Merkel or Emmanuel Macron. At the same time, he owns over 40%, depending on how you count that, but definitely a large portion of the media market. And his media definitely support his economic interests. Let's not forget that he is one of the richest people in the country, and his companies receive huge subsidies from the Czech national budget and from the European Union. At the same time, he owns some very influential mass media that support him. Let me give you an example. A few days ago, there was a scandal in the Czech Republic regarding Prime Minister Babiš. He was allegedly involved in the kidnapping of his son, who was taken to Crimea so that he could not testify in an investigation of an EU subsidy fraud in which the Prime Minister is implicated. It was covered by Czech independent online news, Seznam Zprávy, which is not owned by someone with political ambitions. It is owned by a very rich Czech person who runs an online company, who, nevertheless, decided to have a good independent news team. And then the chief editor of Mladá Fronta Dnes, a newspaper owned by Babiš, and still the most influential daily in the country, published an article in which he actually threatened the owner of this independent media outlet, saying that somebody might also want to inquire into the owner's business, which sounds incredible. On the other hand, the kind of brutal pressure pushing journalists out of the public space has not occurred in the Czech Republic yet. But it is still alarming that big media in the Czech Republic are almost completely owned by business people, whose business is affected by politics. They can, thus, use the media to promote their own business and political interests. If we have independent media, they are typically founded by those journalists who left mainstream media after they had been taken over by oligarchs. But these independent media in the Czech Republic are rather small. Their budgets are lower, and also their reach and impact are smaller. So, this is a problem that can also be seen in the fact that unless there is a huge case that needs to be covered by all media, including those owned by oligarchs, there can be some information that simply does not reach the general public. We have one advantage compared to Poland, Hungary, and even Slovakia, and that is the fact we still have rather strong public service media. Both the Czech television and Czech radio a large news media with large budgets. I wanted to ask, so unlike in Poland, Hungary and Slovakia, where the public service broadcaster has already been hijacked by a former métier propagandist, public service media in the Czech Republic are generally speaking still good. How is that possible? Well, skeptics say that it is just inertia, and sooner or later this will change, and the quality will go down. It is clear that Czech TV, Czech radio, and to some extent also the Czech news agency are under strong political pressure, especially from Prime Minister Babiš, but also from President Zeman. They don't have their people in the controlling boards of these public broadcasters. They continue to put strong political pressure on editors, managers, and people working in these news media. So the atmosphere is not great. It depends on individual journalists' courage, whether they will, for example, start a major investigation or not. Luckily, we can see there are still many brave journalists in the Czech television and Czech radio, and they are not afraid to investigate what the government is doing. But the question is how long this will last. Maybe a day will come when, as my Hungarian colleague said, some people might find themselves on the blacklist and they will not be invited anymore to take part in some of the most important media programs that can reach the general public. Public service media are now basically only two major media outlets which still reach the mainstream public. The attack on media can take place on two fronts. One front is the government, the state's intervention using its power, whether it relates to private media or public ones. But there is also the other front line, the front line of the so-called alternative media. One media outlet says one thing, and another says something else, and both are treated the same. Nothing is true. Everything is relative. In Slovakia, we can see this daily, as these alternative media are based on nonsense and lies, but they pretend to be relevant. And those politicians who want to make use of that claim that these alternative media are fine, like Trump, to what extent is this second front line, i.e. discrediting mainstream media, active also in your countries? There is such a concept in Poland as symmetrists. It's like this. Maybe this government is not the best one. Maybe it is violating the constitution. But the previous governments did the same. It was not any better. Thus, these people are a little bit guilty, and those people are too. So don't get so excited. Truth is somewhere in the middle, as they say. No, truth is not in the middle. It is where it is. And those tendencies of forging discussion are especially noticeable on social media. I mean the trolls. It's what Putin is doing. It's what we encountered in the American elections. Now, the Chinese communists are trying the same in Taiwanese elections. In Poland, all of a sudden, we've heard thousands of voices full of hatred, language of hate, lies, falsehood, a lot of that stuff. You have to understand the international context is favorable to that. It's not a good weather for democracy now. Even in the Czech Republic, after 1990 and later, Czechoslovakia with Havel was a signal to the whole world that politics can be better.
Sygnał dla całego świata, że polityka może być lepsza.
Today, the Czech Republic, with Zeman and Babiš, sends a different signal.
Polska z mitem
Poland has the myth of Solidarność. Pope John Paul II, Walesa, Geremek, Mazowiecki. Today's regime in Poland is half Fidesz, half Jobbik. What an interesting coalition. It's very dangerous. And all those voices try to make the truth relative. You think they violated the Constitution? I have a different opinion. There is no different opinion. Either they did violate it or not. If there is no constitutional court, if they don't recognize the decision of the Court of Justice of the European Union, as Dostoevsky said, soul, have fun, there is no God, meaning everything is allowed. And such relativity is very dangerous. Plus, in Poland, there is a new role of the Catholic Church. During the communist dictatorship, the Catholic Church was an oasis of freedom. For us, Democrats and dissidents, it was a shelter. It was the only place like this in the whole socialist bloc. In Russia, the Orthodox Church was a KGB agent. The church was too weak, marginalized, and intimidated elsewhere. It was different in Poland, where it was a moral, political, and social power. Now it's over. Today the church in Poland is not conservative, it's reactionary. And they want to turn history back. Many of our bishops speak the language of the 1930s. They lost their ear for what totalitarianism is. They speak the language promoting nationalism and chauvinism. They don't resist campaigns full of nationalism, intolerance, hate, nationalistic phobias such as anti-Germanism, anti-Ukrainianism, Russophobia. The myth of the Polish innocence, saying that the Poles have never hurt anyone in their history. This is nonsense. It's raising a society of idiots. You can't tell people that your history was sinless, that it was the neighbors who were treating you bad. I think it is very dangerous, and that is why meetings like this one here are meaningful. We look to the Budapest mirror. Aha! If it is happening in Budapest, it's going to happen in Poland soon. It's true. However, I want to make a polemical point. In my opinion, the classical left-right division doesn't matter anymore. What matters now is the attitude towards democracy, Europe, constitution. Those are the three most important things. Here in Kyiv, I saw posters against gender issues, homosexuality, and this is nonsense. Today, there is no danger of an invasion of homosexuals to Ukraine, Poland, or Hungary. What really threatens us is our inner weakness, foolishness. The people who vote for Kaczynski and Orban, and what Putin does, not the homosexuals. Furthermore, today Putin proclaims himself protector of conservative values. You have to think that those values mean today. It's like Stalin proclaiming himself protector of the values of the Enlightenment, although the only thing he remembered from the Enlightenment was the guillotine. Another thing about Poland. I see Poland as a civilized society and country with a proud history, also a history of suffering and many brave people. But it is hard for me to understand that a large part of this Poland believes in the hybrid information war, in things such as the Kaczynski aircrafts crashed because of the opposition, because of Polish liberals, Donald Tusk, etc. How comes the situation has gone so far? How can such a big part of Poland believe such a myth and obvious nonsense? Talking about the Smolensk tragedy, well, there are also Americans who believe in UFO. A certain reasonable part of the Polish society let themselves be fooled. You're saying the Poles are so brave and courageous? It's like saying that the neighbour's grass is always greener. I was looking at the Czechs. A long time ago, we used to meet members of Carter 77 in the Krokonosze Mountains. I was fascinated with Havel, Dizvel, Landowski, such minds. Pithart, Shiklowa, fantastic people. And now it's Babiš and Zeman. I still can't understand what happened to Zeman. I knew him personally. It was a different person. I don't know what has happened to him. Why the Poles believe in what you said? Because in every country there are people who believe in nonsense. In times of Stalinism, the Poles believed that the Americans were dropping the Colorado potato beetle to damage the harvest in Poland. People believe many different types of nonsense. What Kaczynski is trying to make us believe is incredible. Like there is independent Poland, that there is a German-Russian condominium. When I say about it in the interview for the Russian newspaper Novoya Gazeta, they couldn't understand what I was saying. Condominium? What does it mean? They are telling unheard of things. Although that story with the plane is not working anymore. It lasted for too long. You can't tell people for 8 years we are going to show you all the evidence and documents and turn up with nothing. It's nonsense. However, there are people who believe in this nonsense because that's what a governor says or a priest. It's something irrational. Although we know situations when whole nations have some sort of an obsession, and now a part of the Poles have such an obsession. Kaczynski himself says there are first and second-rate people in Poland. I'm a second-rate Pole, a bad Pole. When we are saying that the Polish army invaded Zalozia in 1938 at the same time as Hitler was taking Sudetenland, they're saying we are teaching shame. No, it's a teaching of the truth, because we want the truth. The Poles need to know truth about their own history. If anybody wants to fool him, His place is in a circus. It's not only you who doesn't understand it. Half of Poland doesn't either. What's going on with these people? They have, as Orwell would say, the Ministry of Truth, where everything is turned upside down, although sometimes it also influences some respectable people, famous writers and film actors. There is a prominent film director, Krause, who made a great film about a strike of workers in December of 1970. He says, "For me, it's quite obvious. It was an attack. And that is crazy." The fight of the truth versus lies and this relativization of truth. How successful is it in Hungarian media? When these fake news factories first appeared in the Hungarian media, that was probably financed by the Russians. Now the government has also realized that it is a very efficient method, and they have orchestrated entire character assassinations. I'm also blaming ourselves because the Hungarian media realized very late that online content cannot be provided for free all the time. And Hungarian readers are used to the fact that whatever is online is free, and it's difficult to tell them that they need to pay for quality content. Slovakia is at least 5 years ahead of us. Right now, if someone wants to apply a subscription-based solution in Hungary to guarantee good quality content, it's unsustainable as a business, because no one wants to pay. Campaigns that have no basis in reality whatsoever pass through social media without a hitch and are suitable for the character assassination of a political movement or a person. People are vulnerable to this phenomenon, and we have to work on making them understand that high-quality content is not for free. We are at the beginning of this path. We can't see yet if we will succeed because now all resources are in the government's hands. Just to get the right picture, in Hungary, the government took control over public service media and they used oligarchs to take control over a large part of private media as well, including tabloids. What is the current strength of reliable media in Hungary? Printed news media have entirely lost their influence. Presently, there is one opposition daily newspaper, but it is a kind of opposition that made its own deal with the government. I brought their Wednesday issue with me. The front page is all about the huge mistakes Orbán is making, but the 16-page newspaper contains 3.5 pages of government advertisements, full-page ads. So practically, they made a deal how far they can go with their articles, and in exchange, they won't be forced out of business. In the online space, there is still strong opposition and independent media organizations. But the government is working on this. They already have some ownership in Index. We don't yet see them interfering with the content, but it's only a matter of time. We don't really see the way out. For us, it's a merciful situation that many people are interested in what we write, and they do pay money to be able to read us. But we are also very easy to do away with. If there's a tax audit and they find some accounting error, we will get a big fine we will not be able to pay, and we will have to close up shop. That's what happens in other areas of the economy. This week, the greatest artificial fertilizer company had 250 police officers entering their premises. They even threatened their families. All in order to have the company sold to another company that is associated with Lawrence Mészáros, Orbán's gas fitter. So practically anything can happen in Hungary at this point. Tomáš, listening to this, it may seem that the Czech Republic is some kind of oasis for the freedom of speech, but there are these so-called alternative truths and facts also seem quite successful in your country. Do you think this battle is lost, like in Poland or Hungary? Or is it perhaps 50-50? It is certainly not 50-50. What our Hungarian colleague said is that good media, high-quality media, should start collecting money from readers to work on this good quality. But there is probably no other way. We can see it in the Czech Republic. There are some really good media, and some are still owned by business people who treat journalists well. For example, Zdeněk Bakala, who owns Aktualnie.cz and the Respect magazine. These are media which are not spreading any kind of propaganda, but we cannot expect them to do investigative work on their owner's business. So the challenge for this high-quality media is to get some paid content to be paid by readers. This all leads to a place where the authoritarians want to be. They don't want to get rid of their critics completely. In this sense, they are much smarter than the 1970s and 1980s communists. They can see that even Putin has not dissolved all opposition media. They just need to take control over the major mainstream media, the major TV stations, radio stations, and dailies. Then they are willing to ignore the minor ones, some online media and literature magazines, and so on, and they let the opposition have. Because they know these will only attract minority readers and intellectuals who are not their voters anyway. So there lies danger for future. This applies especially to Hungary and the Czech Republic because these countries are culturally inward-looking. Poland is more open to global trends and it is more integrated on the intellectual level. You can see that there will be societies that will have an opposition, but it will be sort of closed in an intellectual ghetto without much influence. And this can be dangerous for political campaigns where politics are not more than a cover-up, because, in fact, the real question will be the question of who can get resources easily, the contracts, the money in markets like Russia or China. When I listen to all three of you, it sounds rather depressing for the freedom of speech and also for the future of society. It seems the state power can take control over everything it needs. But let me go back to Václav Havel before 1989. His work, for example, The Power of the Powerless, was prohibited at that time. How many people read his stuff? Very few. The truth was banned at that time. And still it was possible to win this fight. The truth has some power by itself. Sometimes it takes a long time, but it is powerful. In our countries, do we have truth? It is not like everything is true or everything is a lie at the same time. Are there certain specific truths, like the truth about Orbán, the truth about Kaczynski, and the truth about Babiš? Does it exist? Does it have enough power? Is it stronger than the power of the government? It is not as strong as it was in the past. Because paradoxically, the truth was much more valuable and important in a totalitarian regime than it is now, in our current flood of information generated by everyone in online and social media. Basically, everyone has access to information these days, and also to publishing it, which relativizes its value. There is the flood of information, and people simply get lost in it. Also, the government's power is smarter. Communist dictatorships were poor dictatorships. They did not have access to markets. They could not work with modern communication technologies of the time, such as video, Xeroxing, faxing, and so on. And that was also one of the reasons contributing to their fall. Contemporary authoritarian regimes are smarter. They did not abolish capitalism. In fact, they capitalize on capitalism. They take advantage of it, and they are quite rich. They use the money they have to buy the expertise and technology which communist regimes could not even dream of. And they are doing very well. It is what Russia is doing, for example, and illiberal regimes in Central Europe do something like this too. If you look at Prime Minister Babish's campaign, he really has a high quality. It is done by professionals, like people who worked for political campaigns in the USA. It is easy to conclude that someone as rich as that and with such a professional team is positioned very well to win in the information war. So the truth is still there. But it is only accessible for a limited number of people who are pushed to a ghetto. So you say that the real truth has less power than it did during communism? Just look at what is happening in the Czech Republic. If you have an objective look at this affair with the Prime Minister's son's kidnapping to Crimea, it seems incredible. And yet, there were only 25,000 people who joined demonstrations on the 17th of November, on the anniversary of the 1989 revolution. During the Velvet Revolution, there were hundreds of thousands of people in the streets. Although the regime was of a different nature then, of course. Nowadays, the truth is much more relative. Many people comment on this scandal on social media, and they don't even believe it. They simply believe Babish's lies and propaganda. They simply refuse to believe the news outlet that investigated and reported this scandal. Is it true that the truth in Poland is weaker than it was during communism? I don't think it's lost for Poland. The struggle in Poland is still going on. The latest local elections have shown that Kaczynski's tank went into a skid. It has stopped. They lost in all major cities. They won in the provinces and villages. It is a serious change. Secondly, we recall with nostalgia the forces of truth in the times of communism. I remember 1989. It was after elections in Poland. As a member of parliament, I had a diplomatic passport and I went to Czechoslovakia, where there was still a dictatorship. We went to a house of Jiří Dienstbier and there were 30 cars of STB around, but they could do nothing to us as we had diplomatic passports. We were walking in Prague, such a beautiful city. It didn't fit into communism. Beautiful city, modern Europe. We went to meet Havel at Hradeček, and I said to him, Vashek, this city, there will soon be no communism. It won't hold here. And he answered, the Czechs are not like the Poles. You don't know what you are saying. The Czechs are somewhere between Czech and Kafka. It's going to last. Well, you'll see. At the end of this year, you're going to become the president, I said as a joke. But it came true. Changes happen all of a sudden when you don't expect them. Something turns inside, and the whole system based on lies, manipulations, and fake news collapses. Talking about Poland, I'm quite optimistic. I've noticed that luck has turned its back to PIS. They used to be lucky, but now everything is turning against them. Of course, there is the problem of relativizing of truth. And they say in Poland, truth is like an asshole. Everybody has one. It's a joke, but there's something in it. There is a fear that someone is going to tell you what you have to believe. It is as a result of communism, but now it works against Kaczynski. He wants to have one truth, only. But people are saying to him, wait, buddy, your truth is not the only one. How is it in reality? I think there is the truth, and it has power, although no one can tell that he is an owner of that truth. When I tell it about myself, it is about me and not about the truth. And I think Havel, whom you refer to perfectly, understood it. He understood that there is an absolute horizon, but we are people, not angels, and we have to stay on the ground. We are predestined to find compromises, to make concessions, to say, I'm not an owner of truth. In that sense, I would say, truth is a task. We have to proceed to the cognition of truth. Nevertheless, we can't announce that we have found the truth and everybody else has to accept our understanding of the truth. It's not about politics. It's about culture, interpersonal relationships, as well as traditions. Polish society is quite conservative. It's Catholic. In Poland, the whole LGBT and gay problem is very delicate, and PIS is using it. They say, look, they want to introduce a dictatorship of pederasts. They want pederasts to rule. In Russia, radicals are not saying liberals. They are saying liberasts. Junkies and liberasts are our Euro enthusiasts. I support tolerance, but if I live in a society like this, I have to acknowledge the right of others to have such conservative views, and I have to look for some compromises. Same with abortion. Poland has the most conservative abortion law in Europe and the most powerful Catholic Church. If we want to live in a normal country, we have to find compromises. There is no either or. There is either or it's a Maidan and war. That's how I see it. But I'm an optimist. Why? Because nobody has ever managed to finish anything in Poland. They never succeeded, neither with fascism nor with communism. And these current authoritarians are also going to break their neck. And the end of communism started in Poland, and the end of what they are calling a good change is also going to start in Poland. And Hungary? The truth is much more difficult and complicated to sell than fear. Fidesz had no program in the last two elections. They were saying slogans like, stop Soros, stop migrants, and they gained 2/3 majority with this. Fidesz deliberately gave up the intelligentsia, and he said, it's too complex. Persuading intellectuals costs a lot of money. They simply calculated the best way to send simple messages to simple people in order to maximize votes. The problem is, this is much more efficient than to explain complicated things, and we don't see how people can be made to start thinking again. Because it's much simpler to say, I'm afraid of migrants, and I'm voting for Fidesz. If you start explaining complex things to them, like there are migrants, but they don't come to us, and they're coming from a war zone, and we need to help them, you've lost these voters. Fidesz has one sentence: fence, stop them. That's enough. Communication has become so simple on their part that it's really difficult to find a weapon against them. Something with which you can explain to the people that Fidesz is not right. And a lot of people believe in them, because people don't want to think. They want simple explanations. And the last question. We're living in times when the circulation of print media is decreasing. The number of people who read alternative media and believe them is growing, and powerful politicians try to take control over public service media. But having free media is one of the fundamental conditions for the existence of free society. Without free media, there is nothing like free society. Once before the election in France, Anne Applebaum wrote that we might only be one election away from the end of the West, depending on the results of the election. But the problem with media is not only a question of elections, it seems to be a universal problem ranging from the USA to Belarus and Ukraine. Are we, as Western democracy, fatally threatened? We cannot think that democracy is guaranteed forever. If you look at the evolution of democracy from ancient Greece to current times, there's never been a constant progress. Democracy was there for a few centuries, and then it was not there. After Greece, there was the Roman Republic, some form of democracy in the Viking tribes, Italian republican states, and many changes throughout the history. There has never been a continuous evolution, and the modern democracy was based on nation-states, mainly in Europe, and also in the USA, following the era of the Enlightenment. It is not certain that our enlightened era will last forever. There cannot be any fixed, immutable laws, iron laws, to use Marxist terms, that would guarantee democracy. We can see politicians, even in countries with great democratic tradition like the US, acting in a very non-democratic way, but luckily we have these strong institutions that face this authoritarian drive. Are these institutions strong enough? Can they be manipulated or not? This is something we will see. In Central Europe, our democratic tradition is much weaker. And one of the means of controlling the government are the media. With internet, social media, and smartphones, we've entered a new era. Basically, everyone can now speak to the public without much preparation or qualification or education. So I believe the current era, and this applies to the political scene and also media, is a transition one. We are still learning in this decade, and it might take another decade to learn how to navigate in this environment. Some new media are emerging, with some old traditional media like the excellent Gazeta Wyborcza daily in Poland, and some good quality media in the Czech Republic and Hungary are only learning to survive in this era. I'm an optimist, and I believe that within 1, say, decade, this may settle down because technologies are getting cheaper and it is now possible to have very good and cheap TV content online. Your show is a proof of this, in fact. So it is impossible to take control over the entire media landscape. And the question is, how many people will be reached by these high-quality alternative media outlets? This is the question for the future. I really don't think this battle is lost, but we must not think that liberal democracy is something automatic or something to stay forever. Liberal democracy lies on a scale, is never ideal. It is trying to be, though. Somewhere, it is healthier than in other countries, and each generation in each society needs to work hard to make democratic institutions as strong as possible in order to prevent rich people from occupying the whole space for themselves, those who want their loudspeaker, and stop others. Looking at contemporary Hungary is depressing, because what is the alternative for Orban? Is it Jobbik? What is the alternative to Orban's media? There are just some weak media outlets. But still, do you have hope? A few weeks ago, I had a conversation with a world-famous Hungarian network researcher, Albert Laszlo Barabási, who also teaches at Harvard. And he says that mathematical models indicate that we are not yet at the bottom of the well globally. These illiberal politicians are going to win everywhere. And practically, they're going to teach each other how it is possible to exploit the shortcomings of democracy, how they can hack elections and political systems. He says, and sadly I also believe, that democracy has failed, and a great disaster has to happen for us to come up with something that is much stronger and has more guarantees to avoid things that have happened in Hungary. Adam, has democracy fallen? Your Hungarian colleague said democracy was defeated. Is it over? No, it's not like this in Poland. I agree that democracy is changing, transforming, and sometimes it fails. In Poland, we had it in the 1930s. Everybody thought democracy was over. Demo-liberalism goes to garbage. Mussolini, Hitler, Horthy, ONR in Poland, de Grelle in Belgium. Franco, Solana in Spain. Czechoslovakia was an island of democracy in Europe, a conservative democracy in Romania, then the fascists. Also in Austria and everywhere. It looked like the end. It was not the end. It was a historical accident, a dramatic, tragic one, but an accident. Then, after the war, it looked like the Bolsheviks were going to come everywhere. Everywhere. Central Europe fell and then China. If you look at the map, half of the world was communist. Communism looked inevitable, invincible, and it collapsed. Will the brown turn have its own similar dynamics? I don't know, of course. I know one thing. They may form a fascist regime in Poland, but they won't make me a fascist. Freedom starts from me. from my neighbour, friend, co-citizen. If we manage to save that gene of democracy in ourselves, sooner or later they are definitely going to lose, because this is an anachronism, a road to nowhere. A success of all authoritarian populist tendencies comes from different reasons. A crisis of identity and globalization, among others. When I'm in Prague, or as now in Kyiv, I don't have a feeling that I'm in a mono-ethnic city. It still feels like this in Warsaw. Whenever I meet foreigners in Warsaw, they are Ukrainians who look just the same as the Poles. In Prague, there are people of colour, black, Asian, same in Kyiv and Moscow. We can't come back to the idea of a mono-ethnic country. It's impossible. Certainly, Market Without Borders has some shortcomings, and we have to correct them. But coming back to an atatism is impossible. We have had it in the times of Brezhnev. No, it's not going to come back. In this respect, I'm quite positive there is no historical determinism that they have to win. When I was young, I was quite leftist. I read all possible works by Marx, Engels, Lenin and Stalin. And I know now that there is no historical determinism whatsoever. It all depends on us. After Zeman, someone reasonable may come as well as after Babiš and Kaczynski. Viktor Orban is not immortal. Even Stalin has not invented immortality, and neither will Orban. Of course, we pay our price. However, I'm personally convinced that first of all, we shouldn't let anyone make a fool of us and make us parrot the nonsense they are saying. Secondly, from the historical point of view, there was the Roman Empire, the Charlemagne's Empire, USSR, the Third Reich, and they all collapsed. And those guys are going to hold out? Those duffers? Babiš with Kaczynski and Putin with Orban? They won't hold out. I'm an optimist.
Adam Michnik, Csaba Lukacs, Tomáš Klvaňa. Ďakujem, že ste prišli.